Hey, my name is Mike Hall. I'm president and founder of Strong Fathers, Strong Families, and I have been blessed to be able to present different ideas about father and family engagement at TASB over the years. And even though we're not able to be together this year, I'm still blessed to be here. I hope you're blessed from our time together. But we're going to talk today. I'm going to have to do some clicking here. We're going to talk today about busting your own bubble, how to reach and teach your community, and we're going to talk about how do we know about our community? What do we learn about it in all the kids that we serve? And we mean all the kids that we serve. And so we want to spend some time talking about that. So this came up from several conversations I've had over the past few years. And I presented it to TASB and said I'd really like to talk about this. And then again, as you know, the world changed. And it almost became more important, even though I thought it was important before, based on all the challenges we've been through during the school year and now during the summer. And so as far as who we are, we work with dads and kids in schools. I've done that over the last 20 years at Strong Fathers, Strong Families. We work mainly in Texas, but we've worked with over 220,000 dads in 45 states. And we just finished up our very weird but 17th school year. And so those dads have come through schools in Texas, Head Starts around the country, public schools around the country as well. And now we're working with dads in Singapore, and we're looking at working with dads in other places. So what we want to talk about is really understanding the community outside of yourself as an educator, as an education leader, whether you're a board member or a superintendent or a staff member. And so let me back this up just a little bit. So when I talk about the preface, I proposed this pre-COVID, and then we said, well, we may go virtual, and that's fine, and so we took this on. But even since all of this has hit and we knew we were going to do a virtual conference, we've had basically the murder of a man in Minneapolis. We've had an uprising across the country of African Americans and others that said, enough is enough. But I wanted to preface this with, this is what we've been talking about and thinking about for a long time. I think it's still relevant. I think it's maybe more relevant. But I want you to understand this has been a conversation we've had for a while. So if you feel like it may be more closer to the news of today, depending on when you're watching this, this comes from a lot of discussions several years before any of these things happened. And so with that in mind, I also want you to think about, because there's a lot of feelings out there, there's a lot of talk out there, and even from where we're coming from, I want to go back to Stephen Covey, the old principles as I learned as a principal, through Stephen Covey's First Things First, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the ones that I think they're all important, but one of the most important ones for me was to seek first to understand. So as you hear all the rhetoric, and I'm not talking about media, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm not even talking about social media, Lord forbid. But as you talk to the families in your district, which is where you're doing work, which is what we're talking about here, seek first to understand. We've got so many ideas about what everybody else thinks, and everything has become so polarized, and it's not good for our country, but it's not good for your local community. So if what we talk about today raises some feelings in you, and it's not going to be as serious as you may think it's going to be, those of you that know me. But think about when you're in a board meeting and we give our constituents, we give citizens that 5 minutes to come up and address the board. And we say, you've got 5 minutes. You can't say certain things. You can't basically talk about your people or somebody's mama, even though that's not in the rules. Hopefully that's understood. But you've got 5 minutes to talk. And there's a reason we do that. There's a reason that we have that set up, not just to hear our constituencies, but there's a reason we do that the way that we do that is also good for the school and good for the school board. It's a time for us to hear. We as educational leaders need to take that time and just hear what they have to say. Don't worry about a rebuttal because you don't get a rebuttal, but also just to hear. The other thing is to not speak. Not only so it makes you a better listener, but also so you don't say something stupid that winds up in the newspaper or gets misconstrued no matter what your intentions were. And it's not necessarily something stupid that you said, but it sure can be taken that way by stupid people. And then sometimes we just say stupid things, and Lord knows I've spent my whole life doing that. Probably going to do it today. But we're here to hear, and then to not speak, and then to take action. And again, most of what I'm going to talk about today is not that controversial, but as you think about how you're going to go and address your families in the coming year, with possible virtual schools continuing or going back to it sometime in the next year, with all of the raw feelings that are in our communities about race, and how we're addressing that, and police and school police and all the things that I know you've heard about and are listening to. Think about this. Listen, don't speak, then take action. And we're going to try to do that today. And so that I just wanted to remind you, that's why we do that in a board meeting, and it's a really good practice, particularly for the things that are going on today. And so that's my soapbox. So when we talk about community, you as a board member serve the community at large. You serve the taxpayers, you serve the families that send their kids, you send the businesses that hire those kids. And so as many of you remember on Sesame Street, who are the people in your neighborhood? And I don't know if you have green people or blue people, but you got a lot of different people in your neighborhood, and we want to talk about that. So we have 5.4 million students enrolled in Texas public schools. And then I know some days you guys feel like you have all of them all at one time, but they are spread out through large and small districts, rural, urban, and suburban. And so they're everywhere that we look. And so as we look at the percentages, 52% of all those students in the state of Texas are Hispanic. 28% are white, Anglo-Caucasian, and then 12% are African American, and then always nice to come in under that 7% other or biracial. And so that's how this gets broken down in the state. And yet there's a lot of things that we've got to address, and there's a lot of things that we have to understand. A lot of people feel like schools are built to best support white kids, or upper middle class white kids, or middle class white kids, or that we have these disparities in different places. So I wanted to present these percentages that I know you know, but what are the percentages in your district, because that's where you're working. So we want to, just think about, okay, who are all the kids coming into the building, because those are the kids in our neighborhood. Those are the people in our neighborhood that we meet each day, as the song says. And so when we think about all the kids that come into our school every day, if you're a uniform school, a lot of them dress the same, but they don't have the same skin color. They may have all the same skin color. They may have a lot of the same ethnicity, but 1 in 5 of Texas students lives under the poverty line. And the poverty line in the state of Texas is like $12,000 a year for one person not raising kids, $25,000 a year for a family of 4. Some of us feel like we can't raise a family of 4 on $25,000 a month some days when we look at what it takes to do that. So 1 in 5 students lives under the poverty line. These are the numbers you typically get, but 3 in 5 Texas students are free and reduced lunch. You may not be under the poverty line, but still qualify for free and reduced lunch. But 3 out of 5, more than half of our kids qualify for free and reduced lunch. So there's some kind of economic stress on those families. And so when we lay these numbers out, here's what I want to challenge you to think about. Do you know these kids? Are these kids that hang out with your kids? And some of them do. Some of these are your kids. Right? But a lot of times as leaders, as members of the community, we may find ourselves on the upper end of these numbers. Right? So do you know these kids? Do you know these families? And that's the discussion we want to have. That's what we're talking about, bursting our bubble. Because so many times we know our kids and our kids' friends. We go to church with a certain group. We hang out with a certain group. We live in a certain neighborhood. And that's kind of our bubble. And yet, we're not just serving the people that we know. We're not just serving the kids that go to school with our kid or the kids that hang out with our kids. Your kid may be on the football team or the volleyball team or in cheer or in band or in choir or in theater or technology or whatever it is they do. But do you know all the other kids? And some of you are in a real small district, and you have this idea, and I think a lot of times it can be true, that you know all these kids and you know all these families. But I work in a lot of small districts, and when we do our Strong Father programs and we get a large percentage of that population, the whole school population, people will say, who are these folks? Where do these are dads I've never seen before. And that's in very small schools. And so I want you to challenge yourself to think about, do I really know, number one, all my families? And then number two, do I know what they're dealing with? Do I know what they're going through? And that's kind of the idea that we're going to express today. And so we want to make sure that you know who's coming in. And like I said, we started this conversation a long time ago. Last year at TASB, I did a somewhat similar workshop where we've just got to think about how are we addressing those kids that are almost invisible. Like I have good friends that have actually taken on and adopted, fostered and adopted kids that were raised in war-torn Rwanda, kids that were watched their parents be killed and or were asked to kill their parents, that snuck off into the bush, that went to not a concentration camp, but a refugee camp, might have been felt the same to them, refugee camp as very young kids until they could come to the United States. And they're called the invisible children. We have children like that in our own school districts. And so we've had this conversation ongoing. And so I want to show a video to you about an interview that I was able to do, since we're doing it online, with Don Dunn from Van ISD. The video, just the very first part of the video, who knows, it's some kind of voodoo going on. But I'm going to show you that video, and then we're going to come back and talk about it.
So as part of this presentation today, I wanted to bring in some guys that I've been able to work with in good districts doing good things. And Don Dunn from Van ISD is with us. And Don, you and I had this conversation where when we first brought Strong Fathers to Van, we've always promised we're going to bring in people you never knew existed, particularly dads. But the conversation you and I have had is the fact that you've got families showing up at these events, but sometimes our administrators, our school board members, our leaders, even our teachers don't always kind of understand about all the different groups and or challenges that we have in the district when it comes to families. And so what are the ways that you see that happening within kind of all those levels of, education, from board members down to staff? And what are some of the ways that you've seen have really helped do that, or, work with that and get people just kind of understanding who our real demographics are, because the numbers have faces, right? So,
right. Well, I mean, here at Van, we're about 65% economically disadvantaged, and we preach that. I mean, we all of our administrators know that. We talk to our teachers about it all the time, and including our board members.
Mm-hmm.
But after about the second time that we had a bring your dad to science night or a reading night, I had a board member, just to kind of accent this right here. I had a board member, matter of fact, he's the president of our school board. He has a he has a son that's the same age as my daughter. And I told him, I said, you're going to have to come to this event. I mean, you need to really bring your boy up here, and you need to be a part of this. You need to see what this is all about, because it's really pretty cool. And so he showed up, and we have it in the high school cafeteria, mm-hmm. and it's packed. And there's probably 500 people in there. So first thing is he walks in, and he's just overwhelmed by how many people, how many dads are actually showing up to this.
Right.
I think that originally he thought that this wasn't going to be very well attended, or
right.
I really don't know what he was thinking, but when he walked in and saw that the cafeteria was absolutely packed with kids and with their dads, I think he was blown away. But then as we sat down, as we sat down, when we started having these parents, these dads walk in and sit at these tables, he started looking around, and it was it was the true community. We had lots of dads that were walking in straight out off of work, in their in their suits from their the auto shops, or the straight from the fields. He saw lots of tattoos that night.
Right.
Lots of earrings, and anyways, it was we're a little town that we're known for our oil, as an oil community. We have nice churches, we have nice schools. If you were to drive through the middle of town, you were to think this is this is a nice little community. There's not any problems here. But he was, he has grown up here. He went to school all his life here, graduated from Van. And so now his kids are going through the schools, and he was blown away by the different people around there. Matter of fact, he said, "Hey, who are these people?" And I said, "Scott, we've been trying to tell you that we're 65% economically disadvantaged. This
Right.
is the kids that we're trying to reach."
Right.
And I think that night it really opened his eyes to, hey, 65% economically disadvantaged means that our teachers and our administrators are they have a lot on their plate here.
Right.
They have a big job to do, and they're not playing with the same type of kids that I went to school with. So that was huge. Another real quick story about a board member that is the same thing. Huge family here in Van. It had been a board member. She had been a teacher here for years. Was a board member for several years. We had gone out in the community. We have a trailer park that's just south of the administration building. This was pre-tornado, and lots of poverty, just a whole lot of poverty. And it's just a rows and rows and rows of trailer houses that are about, 15, 20 feet apart,
Right.
just stacked on each other, all the way down. And so we were going to the convention in Fort Worth, the TASB convention that summer. And I went and picked her up, and we went by Sonic. And she asked me, "Hey, what did you do this weekend?" I said, "Well, we went over to, South Bodark and handed out some flowers yesterday." And she said, "Really?" She said, "I've never been down South Bodark Street." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me."
Well, Van being the metropolis that it is, it would be hard to get to every road.
Well, it's Mike, I think what it is it's a lot of out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
I
Absolutely.
really do believe that. And, I think everybody, they don't want to see that kind of thing. First of all, they want to believe that they live in the best community in the world and that they don't have any issues. But after we got our Sonic drink, before we headed to Fort Worth, I drove her down South Bodark Street, and she was almost in tears by the time that we got through it. And that's what it's the same type of deal. It was the same aha moment of, hey, I cannot believe that we have this, and it's a mile away from the school.
Right.
So, anyways, but Mike, the great thing about your program is that, number one, it brings out all kinds of people. Anyone who hasn't done this before, if you'll just do what Mike asked you to do, and it's a turnkey deal. Mike takes care of everything. But if you'll just do it, you're going to be shocked at how many people show up. You better have a plan for parking. And I'm serious about that. You better have a plan for parking because the dads are going to show up. And so the great thing is that they are going to show up, and it shows everyone how much parents that we as administrators always hear from our teachers is, hey, if only our parents would, only if we had good parents. Well, hey, these parents are doing the best that they can.
Right.
First of all, they're trying to put food on the table, and they may be working from dusk to dawn.
Right.
If the kid has a program at the school, and he says or she says, "Dad, will you come to the school with me?" They're coming.
Right.
Because they're doing that because they love their kids. And no, they may not look like everyone else, but they're still dads and they still love their kids.
Well, and by the way, that commercial I did not compensate him for that commercial. But Van is one of those places that we do talk about because they've been so supportive. Let me slide ahead on my slides here. You've already seen these. For me to do some of this magic, I got to get to here. So like I said, Don and I had that conversation a couple of years ago. And the same time that he and I had that conversation, I have a school in Nebraska, Madison, Nebraska, a little small town. I told him it was actually smaller than Van because they didn't have a Sonic, barely had a grocery store. They had 4 bars because it's Nebraska, but very small school, 548 kids, K-12, large Hispanic population, large Burmese population actually because Tyson has a plant there and they actually recruit Burmese and Cuban families to come and cut pigs up. And so here's this school out in the middle of a cornfield in Nebraska, and very, very diverse, particularly for the middle of Nebraska. And we did a science night there. It's funny to me that both schools are red, because I just have this scene of, the red gym. And we were in the gym, and one of the board members came, and his child it was now in high school, but his child had gone to the private school, a large Catholic community there, German Catholic. So his child had gone to the Catholic school up into, I think, maybe middle school, and then came on to high school. But regardless, he comes in, and he actually asked the very same question to the superintendent while I'm standing there. He says, "Who are all these people?" Because he doesn't work at the Tyson plant. His kids go to church in a certain place. They play sports in a certain place. His kids were on a select team, and so even though they played school ball, they hung out with a different set of kids. He lived in a different part of town and did not even realize, even though he'd been told about the demographics, what the demographics were for that school. And he wasn't mad about it or anything, but he just had this shock of where are these folks coming from. Now, part of our job at Strong Fathers is to bring in people that you haven't been able to reach before. But regardless, you need to know who it is. So even if you go to the football game, you have to realize there's a large percentage of your families that never go to a football game. They can't afford it or they don't care, right? And you're sitting with your friends in your group, and just like when my son would have his friends over, there was always a few kids, particularly since my kids were in band, and it's a pretty large, diverse group. There were kids in there that were definitely from a different economic stratus, maybe had some different family situations going on. We have 5.8 million kids being raised by grandparents every day in this country, and so all kind of different situations. And so the more I would hang out with them, I would see that. I see 200 to 300 dads a day in schools all over the state of Texas, and I did before we got locked down. But I get to get those stories, and I get to kind of see the diversity, because that's kind of what we do to bring them in. But this conversation started because we just do have this bubble. My mom is on the school board at Springtown ISD, where I live, and she was on the school board years ago, and then she ran again after the age of 70. And my wife teaches in this district. My sister teaches in this district. Now my brother teaches in this district. Both of my sons graduated from Springtown ISD. I tell people that my grandmother was a porcupine, my dad was a porcupine, I was a porcupine, and I raised 2 porcupines. And my mom knows this community, and she has been very active for a long time. But at the same time that she became a board member for Springtown ISD, she began to become a volunteer for CASA. And she became an advocate and a legal ad litem for children in our county, typically in our school district, that had just horrible things going on in their life. And then she began to get numbers from, and so she's dealing with all these situations, and even that was an eye-opener for her, because she did not realize how many kids in our district were placed in foster care or taken out of the homes within the district. How many kids in the county were going through this same system and dealing with that, on top of the fact that teachers were dealing with a kid that had been displaced from their family, that had gone through this. We'd heard about the trauma. She just didn't realize the numbers. And she's also become an advocate, kind of along this same vein, inside the school board, because she's telling them, hey, you guys have to understand what we've got going on in our district with our kids. Because we as teachers tell people, administrators tell people, superintendents tell people, but we've got to understand all those numbers are not just numbers. They have faces, and those faces come into school every day, and they provide a challenge and an opportunity for our frontline staff, for our office staff, for our administrators, and for all of us as educational leaders. And so really want to open that up and get you to think about what is going on in my district. What are the challenges going on, and what does that really look like? And some of you may know. Some of you may be just neck deep in some of the challenges that are going on in your district. But I really wanted to bring up this topic to talk about, how are you going to reach those folks? How are you going to do those things? And so when we began to talk about, some of the challenges, and we say, well, these kids are on free and reduced lunch. This number of kids live in poverty. This number of kids have single families. This number of kids have, they're transient. They've moved several times. It's amazing how many kids in school districts in Texas are homeless, even in our most rural communities. They live in their home, or they live they live in their car, or they live in a trailer, or they live in, I've had kids that lived in abandoned houses. A lot of kids are couch surfers, so they don't live in a home. They live in somebody's home for now, and they'll wear out their welcome and they'll go somewhere else. Or there's some kind of drama and they have to go somewhere else. And so we've got a ton of kids that don't have roots, don't have a foundation, and they're coming into our building every day. But we will say at some point or another, whether it's race, whether it's economics, whether it's educational attainment by their parents, or the challenges that the parents have, not speaking the language, whatever, we say, well, every kid has a fair and equal opportunity to get an education in our district. And that's not necessarily true. You're not meaning to not do that, but when we look at what their challenges are and how we address that, that can be very different. So take our picture right here. This is equal access. You can go up the stairs, or you can you can push your wheelchair up the stairs. Right now, if you're in a wheelchair, you will reach the bottom quicker than anybody walking down the stairs in some form or fashion. But to get to the top from starting at the bottom, that doesn't necessarily look like equal access. But yet, a lot of times I've seen schools that almost have ramps like this because we've just tried to compensate and check the box, and and sometimes our buildings are old and we just do the best we can. We understand that, but we have these challenges. Any of you that have been in a wheelchair know how hard it can be to get around. When I go into a school, I carry a cart or a dolly full of supplies, and it's always interesting to see what it takes for me to get those supplies into the front door of the building as an ambulatory person just pushing a cart. And sometimes I can't imagine what it would take to get a wheelchair where I get that cart. And so, I'm just cognizant of that, mainly because I'm lazy and I don't want to carry stuff, so I bring a cart. But this is what we call equal access. And a lot of times we have provided as much equal access as we can, but sometimes it looks like this. And even if it looks like to us that, hey, we have a ramp for families that have limited capacity of economics, limited capacity of education, limited capacity of support. Like I live 200 yards from my mom. I'm pointing actually over here from my house. I live 200 yards from my mom, and as my kids were coming up, my dad actually took care of our half-day kindergartner for his whole year of kindergarten. I would take care of him when I was working as well, but I had somebody to pick my kid up every day. I wasn't stressed about all the things about getting my kid out of a half-day kindergarten program, whereas you can see the stress just in the pickup line or the kids that get left behind or don't get picked up till late because of all the families trying to do things. And we'd love to say, if they just do whatever. Sometimes this is the ramp that they're facing. Something else that we're dealing with now, particularly with pre-COVID, post-COVID, and now I don't know what post-post is, but there's another idea about equal access. Now, some of you remember Green Acres, and the phone in town was actually up the pole. And I've actually been in some places where I felt like that was probably the phone that they had in town. Not Van, not anywhere in Texas necessarily, but I've been out across the country, and I promise you there's some places where I kind of look up and go, I wonder if that's where they keep their phone. So the top picture is an actual picture of an 11-year-old's room that has a gaming setup as an 11-year-old because he plays games online, and so he's got two screens. He's got basically a multicaster. He's got speakers. He's got high-speed internet. He's got his own workspace. He's got all those things basically just for playing games. Well, you take that same kid and you say you've got to do virtual learning. That's not a problem at all. Probably doing virtual learning on one screen and still playing the game on the other. And then we've got families that don't even have dial-up, which I don't even know if dial-up's available anymore. But they may or may not have a device provided to them by the school, but they don't have a place to put it. They don't have equal access to the internet, and they don't have somebody in their family that could set something like this up. Maybe the kid did it. Most likely there was a dad or a big brother or somebody that helped them get all those things in place. And a lot of our kids don't have that, or they don't have families that use technology in their job, and therefore there's a challenge just in parents helping their kids just to get the technology, much less what they're learning online from the technology. And so I wanted to lay this out and bring this to you to think about, what are the things that you're doing inside and outside of your bubble, right? So many times we have our friends, we have our churches, we have our neighborhoods, and we don't always realize that there's things going on around us. Yes, we go to Walmart. Yes, we go to the store. Yes, we go to all these different places. But I really want to challenge you with a few things as far as action steps that you can take. And one of those things is to look at the numbers and realize, just like Don Dunn said, Van is a fantastic school district. They're doing amazing things. They got a lot of great people. But 65% of that district is on free and reduced lunch. So 65%, 7 out of 10 almost, kids in that school district have some economic challenges within their families. And so what do those numbers mean? When you look at the ethnicity, how are kids being treated? So we've got 12% of African Americans in the state of Texas, but what's the percentage of that 12% that are getting suspended for the same thing that white kids or Hispanic kids even may not be suspended for? And your district may have addressed that. I'm not saying they haven't. But what are we doing based on the numbers? And then understand that those numbers have faces. One of the first projects I was ever involved in after I started doing fatherhood work in schools was in Georgetown, Texas, was at a middle school, and the middle school principal had a photo, a full-page photo of every student printed up, 600, 700, 800 kids, I don't know how many it was, and put all the way around the library. Like every kid had a picture up in the library. And then during his staff training, he gave the teachers, if I remember right, a red dot, a green dot, a yellow dot. And a green dot was, I know this kid, know him by at least his first name, her first name. I've either had this kid in class or I know who they are. If somebody said, have you seen so-and-so, I would know who that is. And then a yellow dot is, I don't know necessarily who the kid is, or I know their name, but I never had them, or I would know if I saw them at the store that they were a student at my school. Like I have seen them at one time or another, even if I don't know them. And then take a red dot and put it on the kids that you would have no clue that they went to this school. You have no recollection from them coming down the hall, being in your class, ever getting in trouble by you, whatever it may be in a middle school. And they said it was amazing that if a kid had a green dot, they had a ton of green dots. And then there was a set of kids that had an abundance of yellow dots, not a lot of green dots. Like I know that's our kid, but I don't really know that kid. And then if a kid had several red dots, they were almost covered up by red dots. Because we have these kind of have these groups of kids that rise to the top from their success and their effort and their personality. And then we have kids that rise to the top because of their personality and because everyone knows who that kid is, right? So I asked dads at my bring your dad to school days, how many of you met the kid your kid's always talking about? And they raised their hand. I said, okay, don't raise your hand. How many of you found out your kid is the kid everybody else is talking about? And a few of them raised their hand. And so I know, as an educator and a guy that's been in schools for 30 years as a special ed teacher and a principal, and now that I walk into a school and a certain kid walks in, I'm like, that's the dude right there. That's the kid. I know that kid, and I don't even know that kid, but that kid, I guarantee it, has a lot of green dots. Whether they like him or not is a different story, but they know that kid. That kid has made himself known, most likely not for positive reasons. And so find those faces and find out who your kids are, and then listen to their stories. Ask teachers, not about how it's going, but say, what is one of your biggest challenges? And whether you tell me the name or not, tell me what their story is. And two things will happen. Number one, some of these teachers know these kids. They've spent amazing amounts of time with them, and they can tell you some pretty incredible stories. Some of the teachers, and it's not a fault of the teacher necessarily, but some of these teachers will tell you the challenges this kid brings, but they don't necessarily know the story. And that's where we start losing kids. That's where we start losing families. Because so many times we may know that family, but we don't know their story. One of the hard parts about being a principal was I got to deal with all the problems, right? That was part of my job, was if somebody else couldn't fix it, it always came to me. And so sometimes I just had problem families, problem kids. But somewhere along the lines, I learned from mentors. And when I did it right, and I didn't do it right all the time, I'd get a mad parent and I'd say, what are you mad about? Okay, tell me why. Okay, tell me what you'd like to do about it. What would you like me to do about it? And I just let them tell me. Try not to defend myself. Try not to, just let them talk. And that's not always easy, but I tried to do that. And then I would say, okay, so what's going on? And they would tell me, I said, no, tell me what's going on. Like what's going on with you? What's going on with your kids? I agree this is not a good situation, but what's going on? And you'd be amazed at how many people would almost just break down because they're not there just because they're mad about something, because they're mad about something. Something's not going right for their kid. But how much else was going on? Like it's basically trying to pull hold on to your kid with somebody else tugging on them while you're walking through a tornado. And so listen to the stories that teachers have, that principals have, that superintendents have. Listen to the stories that families will tell you if you get that opportunity. We always want to know how well we're doing in schools. Ask our families, how well are you doing? Because that's gonna inform our decisions in the future about what we're gonna do in school. A lot of you have very new information about what it's like to try to do virtual learning, and you guys are taking action steps now to try to serve these kids better. So here's a couple more action steps. Just like Don Dunn said in the interview, he took a board member on a drive through a really rough part of the neighborhood. So I think it was the second year I was a principal in Joshua, Texas. Just like any school, it wasn't Joshua, it's every school I've ever worked at. I was having teachers send me kids to the office with referrals because they didn't have a pencil. You got to bring your supplies and you're now defiant, and so go. And I'm like, just give them a pencil. Number one, they're out of class, and number two, not every kid has a pencil. And they were just adamant that every kid at this age ought to be able to bring a pencil and all those things. And sometimes I was in agreement, and sometimes like, do you know this kid? Do you know what's going on? My first year to teach in the teacher's lounge, I had kids sometimes. I had teachers griping about that exact thing. Like this, I have so-and-so. Don't you have so-and-so? I said, yeah, it's in my second period class. That kid never brings a pencil. He has yet to have a pencil. You could tell the kid didn't even take a shower. And they said, he doesn't ever bring a pencil to class. I said, he sleeps in a box of dirty clothes? He says, what? I said, he doesn't have a bed. He sleeps in a box of dirty clothes. And I said, his dad gets drunk at night, comes home, and there's actually bullet holes in the wall because the dad has taken a pistol and shot the place up more than one time. Now, our job is to still get this kid an education. This kid still needs a pencil. But there's only so much you can gripe about, and the griping's only going to do so much when the kid's got all that other stuff to deal with. So knowing that story and we got to see our kids better, this was when we were starting school about the 1st of August. And so the second or third day of teacher in service, I said, you get to wear shorts tomorrow. So everybody's excited. I said, wear shorts tomorrow because we're going to go outside. They weren't so excited about that in August. And so at 3 o'clock, which was a little earlier than we normally got out of school, we left the school building and we got on a bus. And I said, bring the bus. There's no AC on the buses. And I said, bring the bus and we're all going to ride the bus. So we're getting on a bus in August. And man, they're griping. And I said, we're trying to put kids on the bus in the afternoon and we wonder why they're so uptight. Because they're about to get on this hot bus. So we got on the hot bus and I made sure that our bus driver took us to the routes I knew we needed to cover. And we went in our roughest, toughest, just most desolate and desperate neighborhoods that we had. We had mobile homes that didn't have a door, just had a blanket over the door. In the summer, that's okay. But I said, you understand this house has a blanket over the door in the winter too, right? Like there's no door on the house. And so they began to go through those neighborhoods that they hadn't seen. And so we would go and we would name off, if we had the list, of kids that we knew that lived in certain neighborhoods. And of course, we, being melodramatic and trying to get the point across, found the toughest, roughest spots we could and made sure we knew what kids lived in those spots. Because we need to know that the kids we serve are coming from those situations. There's only so much we can do about it, but what we can do is serve those kids and do what we need to do. So take a drive as board members, take a drive as administrators, take a drive with your staff, and just go and look at your entire district. You know, because we say we know those pockets. Go at 6 in the evening. Go at 7 in the morning. Go at different times when you know, like particularly in the summer, when you know the families are going to be out or not, and see what's going on in those households. And then see the kids, right? Understand that every one of those places that has these really tough situations have kids coming out of them. We see kids that come to the board meeting to get honored. We see kids on the football field that are in band or in football or cheer or drill team or all the many things that they do, but we don't see the kids not coming to the football games sometimes. We see the kids at the award ceremonies. We see the kids at graduation, but there's a lot of kids that we don't ever see. And so find ways not just to go up to school. Man, you want an eye-opener as a school board member? You want an eye-opener as an administrator? Go to kindergarten lunch, man. Go sit down and talk to third graders at lunch. You know, find out who these kids are and what they're doing. Spend a little bit of time in the class. You know, let the teacher, you're not there to judge them. You're there to watch what these kids do. Just go at the first of the school and watch these kids get off the bus. So the second year that I started doing fatherhood work, we stole a program from a school in, actually it was in Cedar Hill, and it was called Smiling Dads. And the whole idea was dads were out in front of the building high-fiving kids, opening car doors and directing traffic. And I still promote that kind of program anywhere I can go. And so the dads would come every morning, and it was a middle school, and they'd high-five kids, and they'd say, hey, have a good day. Hey, don't forget to hug your mom. Hey, shut your door. Hey, you guys come on up. And they just directed traffic and did all that. Now, on the dad side of that, let me give you a real quick deal. They cut the number of fights in half in the first year that they did that. Like they started almost the middle of the year, and the number of fights that happened that year was half of what it was the year before. The next year, they had 0 fights. The dads didn't do security. They didn't walk down the hall. But just by those guys being out in front of the building and setting the tone, they helped those kids have better days. So I thought that was a great idea. I did it in my kids' elementary where my wife taught. And it had a lot of dads that were like me, middle class, upper class, middle management and professionals. A lot of guys on their own business, lawyers, doctors, whatever. And so we were always greeting, and they kind of got a sense of some of the kids that were being dropped off. They're like, that car's kind of rough, or that kid, didn't look like he combed his hair or whatever. And then it hit me. I'm like, wait, they're just seeing the kids that are actually being brought to school. So then we started doing bus duty, and I would have 2 dads go every morning and greet the kids getting off the bus at the back of the building. And just like Don said in the interview, I had dads almost in tears because they realized how many kids get, rousted up in the morning, stuffed in some clothes, probably don't get breakfast fed to them. And even if the parent is doing the best they can to get them there, that's kind of how they're showing up at school that morning. They've been on a loud bus. They got up 5 minutes before the bus got there. They may or may not have all their supplies. Their hair's not combed. Their teeth aren't brushed, and they haven't had breakfast yet. And they were just blown away because they knew what they did for their kids, but they didn't know about the kids that were sitting next to their kids in class. So see the kids. And then what our biggest deal is at Strong Fathers is invite the families. The reason that Don talked about the numbers that he did, and remember that was a non-compensated promotional material, is the reason dads come is because we invite them. And whether it's a Strong Fathers event or anything you're doing, the reason the parents come is because you invite them. You don't just tell them, you invite them. If you're having a party, you don't just put it in the paper and say a party. Number one, that would scare you to death. Number two, if you want people to come, you say, I want to invite you to come to my house. I want to invite you to come to my school. I want to invite you to come to your school. But invite the families because they don't always know that they're allowed to do those things. They don't always know that they're invited. You're going because you can't be kept out. You're going because you're going to do those things. And so the whole part of this workshop, the whole point of this workshop was that we serve all the kids in our community. And one of the things that I had a dad tell me one time, he was what I call a crazy granddad, was out of state, wasn't from Texas anyways, so you got to watch those guys. But was telling me, because I had an English flyer and a Spanish flyer, he was telling me, he didn't call it communist, but just some kind, whatever my leftist ideas were, because I had a Spanish flyer. And I said, hold up, what are you talking about? He said, well, you put this flyer out in Spanish. And I told him, I said, Public schools are the most American thing we do. Because if you live within the boundaries of this district, no matter where you're coming from, you get to go to this school. You do have equal access to the front doors of this building. And if you live here, you are welcome to come to school here. Now, what we know is once you get in the building, number one, you don't have all the equal stuff that maybe my kid had, but you've got an opportunity. And so they get to come in the door, and then our job as educational leaders is to make sure that when they come in the door, they have just as much opportunity inside the building as they do getting to the building. And so I would invite you to think about what are ways that we can find out about our families, what are ways that you can look outside your bubble, whether it be, again, your kids, your families, your churches, your friends, and just see who's in your district, and know that there's got to be other ways that we can serve them, but we can't serve them better unless we know who they are. So I appreciate your time. If you've hung in here with us, because I know you're waiting to get your number. If you want to get in touch with me, you can contact me at mycall@strongfathers.com. We've got some more resources, book studies, different resources about this idea. We didn't even talk about race, because everybody's talking about race right now. But all of that plays into this. We've got resources for that as well. So if you'd like to know more about either Strong Fathers, Strong Families, or if you'd like to get a list of resources that kind of leads this discussion about how to better see the families that we serve, there's a great one out right now about middle school and middle school parents, which is almost the opposite of how middle class and upper middle class parents are killing us with some of the things that are going on in middle school. And so we have those resources we'd love to share with you. So if you'd like those resources, go to strongfathers.com/TASB20. We will send you emails. We'll send you some resources. You can always opt out, but we'd love to give you those resources, let you know about how we can serve you and serve schools. And even in this new, this upcoming year, we're going to do some stuff in person, and we're probably going to do more online. I think people become more familiar with online, and so we're going to try to serve people that way. And also, we may be back to being required to do it online. So we don't want to not engage our families. So we want to be available for you if any ways we can be. And so thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to the Q&A after this, and seeing you may have a lot of questions after this. But I'm so glad you came to this session. I appreciate everything you do for kids in the state of Texas and in your communities. And just know that we're here to help at Strong Fathers, Strong Families. Thanks. You can also, here's my email, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Everything is @StrongFathers. So if you'd like to follow us on social media as well, feel free to do that. And again, thanks for joining us.